Okay. So we were in the middle of our access presentation on Tuesday, so we're going to go ahead and finish that. First, let's talk about the EMG real quick, because there was a couple of questions about the electromyography, about the percentage of users that are using that. I did a bunch of research and I could not find a percentage, but what I did find was that, and this is an older number, so that numbers could be different, but approximately 400,000 people with disabilities are out there who may benefit from the use of EMG to control devices. That's, a decent amount, and I'm thinking probably even more than that, but they were looking at specifically like spinal cord, ALS, cerebral palsy, those types of disabilities to get those numbers. So we're going to go ahead. I'm just going to fast forward through all this stuff because we already did all of these slides. And we had gotten into, so we talked about the different types of access points, and then we moved into different things that we need to look out for assessment. And this is where we had left off, was the potential sites. So what we're talking about is mainly switch access at this point for potential sites. So obviously we've got our fingers in our hands, and it's typically the first place that we're going to look, is making sure that to see if possible that the hands or the fingers of the user would be useful for activating a switch, or even, we're talking about keyboards or, mice or whatever. Then we're going to look at the head. So the sides of the head, the back of the head. We can even look at the forehead and the chin as part of that. And then we can look at the face, the mouth, the tongue, the eyes. So for example, eye gaze. And then we're going to look at elbows, arms, shoulders, and then our foot or a knee. So we're going to evaluate all of these potential sites and determine which one has the best consistency for that user. So we want them to be able to consistently hit that switch on a regular basis with reduced amount of the least amount of fatigue. When we're looking at specific control interface features, we want to look at physical and sensory abilities as well. And we're looking at specifically range of motion and motor skills. So this table is a nice little way to look at this. So if we have large range of motions, we can really, we can extend our arms, we can reach farther, but we have, and we have fine motor control. So we have good fine motor control. We have the ability to then potentially use a keyboard, okay? If we have a large range of motion and our gross motor is better and we don't have as defined fine motor skills, then what we're probably going to be doing is looking at a larger keyboard, maybe even a switch array, in order to access like a computer or maybe an iPad or communication device. And then when we look at range of motion for like a smaller or more contained range of motion, so I can't reach as far, but I have good fine motor control, then I can start looking at the use of the smaller or compact keyboards, possibly a joystick or a mouse, in order to control that device. And then a small range of motion with so decreased fine motor but a good gross motor, then I'm going to be looking at switch access. Okay. As part of this assessment, we also need to look at making sure that the control interface is stabilized, it's positioned where we need it to be positioned, and that we also provide plenty of training and practice opportunities to the user to make sure that this truly is the best match for the user. When we need to look at mounting, so for example, let's say we chose a switch, right? We need to look at a couple of different factors when we're setting up a mount. We need to look at the safety of that, the placement of it. So we want that switch to be consistently in the same place. So for example, if the user is using the back of their head to activate a switch, or maybe the side of their head to activate a switch, they're not going to be able to see it, but they can feel it. And that mount needs to be stable enough so that when they move their head in that same position, that switch is always there for them. It also needs to be removable. Sometimes we just need to get it out of the way when we're taking care of our client. It needs to be easy to set up for everybody that's working with that person. And we don't want it to interfere with other equipment. Okay? So if they have a headrest, how are we going to mount that switch so that they can use it? If they have a lap tray sometimes, where are we going to mount that switch to make sure that nothing is interfering with each other? We also need to look at some different things for testing. So we want to compare different things, such as, so if we're looking at two switch sites, for example, which site do they have the best speed and accuracy? Which one is the most reliable for them? How's their endurance or fatigue level in a particular spot for that access? Or maybe we're using a mouse or a joystick. We want to make sure that it's reliable and they're not fatiguing too quickly. Is it comfortable to use for them? Is it easy to use is another one. Can they use it independently? That's huge. We want them to be as independent as possible. We want it to be minimally obtrusive. So we don't want it to take up a lot of space or be in the way. And then a very important one is the user comfortable with it, right? So user acceptance. Do they like it, and are they willing to use it? The other thing we need to look at is integrated versus distributed controls, okay? So distributed means that the access method that we're selecting controls one device only, okay? So let's say we chose eye gaze. That's only going to access the augmentative communication device, okay? Versus integrated, where it's one method, access method, is being used to control more than one device, okay? And this is typically done through the power wheelchair. So for example, there's a product called the B-Joy Ring, right? And it connects into the joystick of the wheelchair, and there's wired and wireless. But what I can do with that wireless is that I can set up receivers on a phone, a tablet, a computer, and then I can control all of those different devices just by using my power wheelchair joystick. Okay, so that's an integrated control where it's one access method and it's controlling more than one device, whereas distributed means I only have one access method for each device. So let's say I have 3 different devices, like that phone, that tablet, and that computer. I would need 3 access methods, so 3 different switches or 3 different mice or joysticks. That would be distributed. The device is called the B-Joy Ring, and I will type it in here for you. So the B-Joy Ring. Okay. Yep. Okay, so any questions before we do our little quiz here? Okay, so for trialing, so when we're doing the assessments, how long are they able to trial? So it says minutes, hours, days, weeks, months. I would say minimum 2-week trial. The longer the better, obviously, but it all depends on the loaner equipment, where you're getting the loaner equipment, if you have access to it for an extended period of time. But general rule of thumb, at minimum of 2 weeks. Then another question, whether devices are suitable for integrated control besides the power wheelchair. There are a lot of Bluetooth devices that are available out there that can be used with multiple devices, but typically the integrated is going to be with the power wheelchair. I'm trying to think of a device. Can anybody think of a device that would be an integrated that's not using a power wheelchair? Somebody said a bed. That's actually, yeah, a good point. There can be controls on the bed. So the question is, does anybody know the answer to this one about the Bluetooth being controversial due to PHI and privacy concerns? I have not had that experience in the schools, but I don't know if anybody else has had those issues. I've also used, hold on one second, guys. Okay. I have not experienced anything with the PHI or privacy concerns. I work a lot in this, mostly in the schools, and I have not encountered that. Okay.
I could jump in. I was talking. I didn't realize I was muted. Sorry.
Okay, it's okay.
Lisa. The hospitals get persnickety with the internet, but we don't have, we're not able to tap into the beds for separate reasons just because of the electronics in the bed. But Bluetooth, as far as working well with most med centers, we end up having to have a hotspot for the devices, but we've never had any tapping into the PHC and privacy. But generally, that's what they're worried about.
There we go. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and, any additional questions, go ahead and put them in there, but I'm going to go ahead and start the test. Oh, the Tekla. Beth, you are correct. The Tekla is, yes, is another integrated device. I forgot about the Tekla. Yes, that's another integrated device where you can do multiple devices with the Tekla. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and launch the test. I don't think Tekla actually stands for anything. It's just the name of the device, and you can just Google Tekla and it will bring it up to the company that sells that. It's a pretty cool device. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and launch the test. So we've got a little over 60% done with that test. So wait a couple more minutes for everybody to finish it. Yeah, Michael, we've had some issues every once in a while where some people can't see the tests for some reason. If you want to reach out to Charlie, see if he has any answers for you as to why not everybody can see the tests. But we'll be going over it here in a second. George, some people are starting to use the Echo. Oh, good, Michael, good point. Yes, glad you have the questions printed. Yeah, anybody who can't see the test, the questions are in the handout, so you'll be able to see them. But George, some people are starting to use Echo and Alexa as a Bluetooth access method. It just depends on what you're trying to control. So things in your environment, in your home, definitely a good way to be having quick, inexpensive access. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close the test. Okay. All right, can everybody see the test results? No. Okay. Let's see here. There we go. How about now? All right, perfect. Okay, so the first one, good, and 92%. So based on everybody who could see see the test, 92% of you integrated controls are defined as one access method controlling more than one device. So if we look at the different answers, two switch scanning, well, that's literally just two switch scanning, right? There's no integration there. Then multiple access methods are used to control a single assistive technology device. That would not be it either. And then multiple access methods are used and each controls a single device. That would not, obviously, that would not be integrated. If we're looking at multiple and methods. And then let's see, the next one, 54%. This was one we did on Tuesday. But once the user's optimally positioned, the first thing you need to be looking at is controllability. We want to look for what part of the person's body has the most control for for access. Then we're going to start looking at these other areas here. Okay. And then the last one, 92% of you got this one as well, was the typical control interface for row column scanning, and that's going to be a switch, because obviously we're not scanning with a keyboard. And then auto is a type of scanning, auto scanning where it just automatically starts, and then voice, obviously that like voice dictation. Okay. Okay. I'm going to stop sharing here for a minute. And we're going to switch over to service delivery. And we have some people that just joined us who have not muted. So if you could go ahead and mute yourselves.
Hello?
Yes,
Oh, is this the ACP training?
it is.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure I was logged in.
Okay, yeah, if you could go ahead and mute yourself, that'd be great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we are going to go ahead and do issues in service delivery. And this one does a lot of, we talk about legislation, funding, ethics, things like that. And when we get to especially funding, we're it'd be really nice to have some discussions about, what do you experience in your different agencies about funding resources, um, qualifying for funding, all of that good stuff, so we can kind of share experiences with the funding. So upon completion of this module, you should be able to describe how the Resna Code of Ethics and Standards of Practice apply to your daily work environment. Describe a wide range of resources for finding out about new and emerging technologies and keeping up to date in general with all the very quickly expanding world of assistive technology. Describing major pieces of legislation and funding streams, common service delivery settings, the roles of and perspectives of all stakeholders, getting a greater understanding of the role of the consumer as an equal participant, describing the components of a QA program, and understand how outcomes can be measured, as well as describing basic product development and principles of design, including universal design, and understanding liability issues as they pertain to your daily work environment. So a lot to cover. Okay. And then, okay. All right, so first is ethics. So just a quick definition of ethics. It's a study of values and customs of a person or a group. The concept, it's related to the concepts of right and wrong, good and evil, and our responsibility in our particular arena, our professional responsibility. And the other thing about ethics is that they're not universally defined or agreed upon. So it all just depends on the organization or the group and what they decide to set up. So this is a good reminder when we're talking about ethics for everybody to look at the obligations that an assistive technology professional has to his or her consumers and all others who are involved in the evaluation, selection, the procurement, and appropriate use of assistive technology devices and services, as well as the general public and the profession as a whole. This means acting in a responsible manner and, above all, doing no harm to the individuals you are working with. So a couple things with the RESNA Code of Ethics. They hold paramount the welfare of persons served professionally, and they're very keen on practicing only in your area of competence and maintaining high standards. So, for example, I'm more on the, computer access, augmentative communication, environmental controls side of, of the field. So if I get a referral for seating and positioning, I'm going to refer that elsewhere. I'm not going to attempt that because that's not my area of expertise. Engaging in no conduct that constitutes a conflict of interest or that adversely reflects on the association and more broadly on the professional practice. And also maintaining the confidentiality of privileged information. Seeking, we also want to seek deserved and reasonable oh boy, remuneration for services, inform and educate the public on rehabilitation and AT, as well as its applications. We want to issue public statements in an objective and truthful manner and comply with the laws and policies that guide professional practice. And we're going to be talking about some of those in the legislation. We're also going to have some discussions about ethical dilemmas. Okay. So first one is recommendation for powered wheelchair in context of medical necessity. Are there any times that you can think of ethically that you would or would not recommend a powered chair being medically necessary? And you can type in the chat, or if you would like, you can unmute yourself and you can talk about these. Here's one. Yeah, the patient can ambulate. Okay, morbid obesity is not a qualifying diagnosis. Okay, poor and declining cognition. Yeah, here's if an individual can use a wheelchair without any difficulty and their medical condition isn't progressive. Yep, still if they're checking to see if they can still use a manual wheelchair, and then patient doesn't have the cognitive capacity to safely operate a wheelchair. So yes, those are all good ones. And some devices may be used to do things a person is still able to do for themselves, which may make their problems worse. So in this case, if they can still use a manual wheelchair and they can use it successfully, there we go. And also devices that may restrict freedom or privacy. George, yes, the mention was that morbid obesity was not a qualifying diagnosis. Okay. All right, so we also want to look at on pages V4, 5, and 6 are the Resna standards of practice for assistive technology practitioners and suppliers. So this is in the Code of Ethics. These are the fundamental concepts and roles considered essential to promote the highest ethical standards among individuals who evaluate, assess the need for, recommend, or provide AT. And I believe these are pretty self-explanatory, and you should read all of this on your own as you're getting closer to taking the exam. All right, so next we're going to talk about different information resources. Where can you find, current information on products and services? So the web is growing, right? When we Google, right? Tons and tons of information out there. And we need to be careful because it's not always accurate. And just because there's lots of information on the web doesn't mean, all right, it's all good. You'll still need to use your common sense in checking out resources, and knowing what questions to ask is still the most important aspect of information gathering. If you don't know what you want, you're not going to find it. Okay. The important thing is to search out, develop, and maintain your information networks. It doesn't matter how you do it, but keeping up to date is extremely important, especially now as everything seems to change as soon as you turn around, right? So we need to know where to find commercially available devices, appropriate service providers, relevant research, emerging technologies, relevant information about policies and regulations, and training opportunities as well. Michael, I think that's a question that Teresa might be able to answer for you on that one. Some other places, so this is just a couple slides showing different places that you can get information. So Google, academic information, BASE, Infotopia, AOTA, ISAC, ASHA, APTA, so all of your other professional organizations. Okay. Some other websites, so you've got Able Data, which they have been updating recently, so that's really nice to see. You've got assistivetech.net, and you have your microsoft.com/enable, your apple.com/accessibility. Google also has an accessibility area, and then there's a smarthome.com. So lots of different areas. You also have your Resna Assistive Technology Journal. What other resources do you guys use to find information? Okay, CEC, Council for Exceptional Children, perfect. Facebook groups on AT. I know there's some good Google, like there's an AT chat or Twitter. There's an AT chat on Twitter. Google for Education. They have lots of good stuff going on with Google and Microsoft too as well. Pinterest. Okay. All right, some other ones. Conferences and trade shows that are out there. A lot of conferences and trade shows. Obviously, you've got Resna, which is in the summer, and I believe this year it's in Virginia. You've got CSUN out on the West Coast, Closing the Gap out in Minnesota. You've got MedTrain. You've got the International Seating Symposium, ATIA down in Orlando, and then all the states should have their State Tech Act conferences. So those are all good resources. And then you have your training and in-service opportunities that are available out there. Resna obviously has instructional courses. You've got engineering solutions. CSUN has a huge training program. You've got the University of Buffalo and the University of Pittsburgh. Ooh, Pittsburgh is spelled incorrectly, and I'm in Pittsburgh, so they have a couple training programs, and then you have publications that are out there. So again, that Resna Assistive Technology Journal, your Technology and Disability, your Access World, Journal for Special Education Technology. So lots of different resources available for you out there. There are also diagnosis-specific and environment-specific journals available. Any other journals or conferences that you guys utilize to get additional information? William mentioned Abilities Expo. Okay. So I'm just going to keep going, and you guys, any other conferences or trainings that you can think of, go ahead and throw them in the chat there for everybody to see. Another area that we need to be thinking about is tracking new and emerging technologies, right? Keeping up to date on everything, right? All the information is out there, right? But keeping up with all that information is what is important, right? Technology sometimes emerges, might just float a little, then submerge or never see the light of day. Okay, sometimes by the time it emerges, it bears no resemblance to the product you thought you saw at the last conference, right? Mainstream technologies and assistive technologies are merging and blurring the lines. We can see a lot of that happening with our operating systems, are incorporating so much assistive technology into them now. growth in the computer and communication industry is absolutely amazing. And the estimates are that about 1,500 new products are expected to hit the market in the next 18 months. So I don't know how we, it's hard to keep up with that. So we need to develop our lines of communication so that we can be aware of the fast pace of all of this technology. So if we think about, like, for example, the aging market, right? And we're all getting older, so we're all going to get there at some point. Universal design is becoming more acceptable as a mainstream alternative to built-in design barriers such as stairs, doorknobs, different, VCRs we really don't have anymore, but now we have, on demand, and we've got DVRs, right? Tons and tons of programmable items. And UCP actually has some really nice videos of various houses that have been universally designed. So you can go ahead and look up the UCP videos. Another example is distance learning, which is the field to be in, right? There's lots of great new programs, study courses, even degree programs available just on the net. And this particular program that you're attending may well soon be available worldwide on the internet, so you don't have to leave your home, right, to complete this course, which you're doing right now through distance learning, right? So a couple other places that you can be looking for information is, NASA Tech Briefs, MIT's Technology Review, even Popular Mechanics. It's amazing what you're going to find out there. Then Converging Technologies for Improving Human Performance, and it's going to be looking at nano and biotechnologies, information technologies, and cognitive science. Okay, so this list here are some of the legislations that we're going to be looking at tonight. So first is the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act. ADA does not provide direct funding for assistive technology, but it influences all of our work. Right? It has 3 parts to prevent discrimination and is not an entitlement program. So there's a lot in this module on legislation and funding, and you have all, and we're gonna, we could be here all night talking about it, right? But without legislation, there would not be the funding for assistive technology devices and services, and most probably no funding for your, most importantly, no funding for your job, right? So we need to understand a little bit about the legislation behind each of the major funding sources, as well as 2 other pieces of legislation, which, while not providing direct funding, do in fact have a great influence on what to do. And one of them is the ADA, and another is the Tech Act. Okay, so we'll talk about those. So let's see here. So let's talk about, let me just talk real quick about the Tech Act, and then we'll go into the ADA. So the Technology Related Assistance for Individuals with Disability Act originally was out in 1988, and it provided funding to develop, let me just see if these slides are, yep, okay. Provided funding to develop statewide consumer responsive information and training programs, and they were designed to meet the AT needs of individuals with disabilities of all ages. That became then, when it was amended to the ATA, the Assistive Technology Act, and they specifically defined AT devices and services that are very important to us. And then another huge piece of legislation for us is this ADA. Okay. So the first part, so remember I mentioned there's a couple of main parts in the ADA that are important to us. The first is all companies with 15 or more employees, right? This is for employment, need to provide reasonable accommodations. And this is when a time when the employer and the vocational rehab counselor may work together, okay? And if we think about the accommodations that are being provided in the workplace, they're very inexpensive, okay? Majority of them are going to cost the company less than $300, which is nice. There are also many lawsuits that have brought employment into statute. So employers who are working with people with disabilities, you know, they're really coming around, but we still have a long way to go. Okay. So the Title I of employment, with the 15 or more employees, right, provide qualified individuals with disabilities an equal opportunity to benefit from the full range of employment-related opportunities available to others. So, for example, it prohibits discrimination in recruitment, hiring, promotions, training, pay, social activities, and other privileges of employment. It restricts questions that can be asked about an applicant's disability before a job offer is made, and it requires that employers make reasonable accommodations to the known physical or mental limitations of otherwise qualified individuals with disabilities. Yes, I did say that most accommodations will only cost about $300 for employment. That doesn't mean all of them, but majority of the accommodations, reasonable accommodations that need to be made, are pretty low cost. Title I complaints must be filed in the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission within 180 days of the date of discrimination, or 300 days if the charge is filed with a designated state or local fair employment private practice agency. Okay. So Title II requires the state and local government to give the person with a disability equal opportunity to benefit from all of their programs. If public transit is offered, there needs to be accommodations. If healthcare is offered to all, then it needs to include accommodations. Same with voting, town hall meetings, so any of that, community um, opportunities out there for everybody. This is the part of the ADA where there have been lawsuits for access to higher education. The blind community and more recently the deaf community have sued for access to higher education as well. Title II also covers transportation, and this is part of the ADA, brings us access to public transportation. Public accommodations, this is the part that brings us accessible restrooms and compliance with architectural standards. Okay. And that brings us then to our next one, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA. This was established in 1990 and was amended in 97 and 2004, and it establishes the right of every child with a disability to receive a free and appropriate public education. Before this, 1 million children with disabilities were excluded from public schools. An IEP is developed to describe the current educational performance and outlines their specially designed instructions and supplemental services needed, such as sensory breaks, the use of assistive technology, whether they're going to be an inclusive classroom. The IEP also sets goals that are measurable to track progress and interventions, and requires the child with a disability to be educated with their peers to the maximum extent appropriate in the least restrictive environment. There's no requirement that AT be used at home or go home. and no requirement that the AT be the best fit. However, we do send assistive technology home at times. So if we think about like an augmentative communication device, are we going to restrict the child to only be able to communicate in school? Or are we going to then send it home so that the child can communicate at home and at school and even out in the community? There are several parts to IDEA. We have just Part A, which is our general provisions. Part B is assistance for education. Part C talks about infants and toddlers. And Part D is the national activities to improve education, which includes personnel preparation, so training, parent training, technical assistance, model demonstration projects, and dissemination of information. And then we have that ATA, which I talked briefly about before. This particular act doesn't provide assistive technology. It provides training, information. They do have loan programs. They do have reutilization programs. But it was the first act to legally define AT devices and services, and extends funding to 50 states, Washington, D.C., and the U.S. territories. Its purpose is to support states in strengthening their capacity to address the AT needs of people with disabilities. So, for example, technical assistance, they'll help with funding, support microloan programs, support the investment in tech across federal agencies, allowing building and loan and demonstration centers. Let's see. So the question is, in the IEP, isn't that the definition of conflict of interest? When the therapy disciplines are the assessors, so it seems that every discipline at the table there are identified needs. Shouldn't this be more conflict-free? That's not always the case. I kind of see where you're coming from. So like, for example, if we have, a speech therapist on there, they might say, hey, they need speech therapy. But that's where like that ethics comes in. We're going to do what's best for the student. And I haven't seen a whole lot of conflict in those areas, but does anybody else have any insight on that with the IEPs and all the therapists being assessors and identifying needs? Um, The AT Act does not provide specific devices, correct? They don't provide specific funding, but they provide funding sources. They can, yeah, they cannot, as you can see on this side that I just moved to, they cannot, the funds that the ATA gets cannot be used to directly purchase AT devices for a person. It is to purchase for demonstration centers. They do have financial, what's the word I want to say, assistance, so they can help a person with a disability identify funding sources and loans when necessary. With the ATA, they're federal and state agencies, right? They're not authorized to reduce medical or other assistance or alter eligibility for a benefit or service under any federal law as a result of the Tech Act. And funds that they received through the grant are used to supplement and not supplant So funds available from other sources for technology-related assistance. So they're very, very strict on what they can and cannot do with the funds that they receive. So at the state level, they have state finance programs, so alternative finance programs for a person, so like loans that they can get, device reutilization programs, so somebody who's getting rid of an older device, the Tech Act can take that device, maybe if it's like a computer, update it, fix it up, and then it's out there. Device loans, demonstration centers, which is really nice. And then the state leadership activities, they do training and technical assistance, lots of information, referral information, just getting, awareness about disabilities and assistive technology out there. They do public advocacy. A lot of them have lawyers on board, and then they do coordination and collaboration of services. Yes, the loan programs are around the state. It just depends on the state. Every state is different. With the ATA, some have one main location, and they will mail devices out to people who don't live near the Tech Act program. So for example, the Assistive Technology of Ohio Tech Act is located at OSU, and they have a demonstration center, they have a loan program, and for free they will send out that loan device. So let's say you're in Cleveland or Cincinnati, they will send it out to you for free. Then there's other states, for example, like Kentucky, who have multiple locations. Same with like North Carolina, they have multiple locations around the state, and they have more regional demonstration and loan centers. Yes, the ATAs are loan, demonstration, training, public awareness, referral, informational type of organizations. Does that make sense? Okay. Okay, next we have our Workforce Investment Act. It requires use of special standards for success in one place for participants to get job training and referrals. It sets up systems to help adults reach specific literacy levels to be successful. Education to reach 8th grade reading levels is the minimum that they try to get you to. There's grants, contracts to provide and conduct training, projects, and services. So there's a training grant. There's research and evaluation to expand rehabilitation services. They have vocational rehab counselors for migrant and seasonal farm workers. There's grants for recreational programs to aid in employment, mobility, socialization, independence, and workforce investment systems, and community integration. And then they have grants for training to develop skills to access rehabilitation systems and workforce investment systems. There's the National Council on Disability, which links the rehab program to state and local workforce development systems. And this includes the individuals with a disability, their parents or guardians, caregivers, and also being able to provide knowledge with disability policies and procedure and programs out there. Also provides guidelines to accomplish goals and incentives to states exceeding negotiated performance measures. So that's just workforce things out there. In 2013, this act replaced the Workforce Investment Act, so the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. And it improved services to individuals with disabilities for physical and programmatic accessibility, employment, and training services. 15% of state VR, so vocational rehab funding, is set aside to provide transition services to youth to young people with disabilities. Has a committee to advise the Secretary of Labor on strategies to increase competitive integrated employment, and vocational rehab state grant programs engage employers to improve participation for employee outcomes. Then we have our Rehabilitation Act. So this was from 1973, and it was the basis for many other laws. It was amended in 1974.
Heather, I think we lost you. Okay, it looks like Heather lost power. So I'm going to pick up from here. Oh, you know what? We need a break anyway. So let's go ahead and take a 5-minute break. We'll do a 7-minute break. So we'll get back at 8:35. Okay? So 8:35. Thanks, everyone. Can you hear me now? You guys hear me now? Okay. So Heather's power went out, so you guys get me now. And I'm just going to try and get set up here. So we got one more minute. I have like my audio is okay. It looks like our screen is okay. We're recording. Okay. I'm going to do my best to keep that chat bar open. Okay. So we're going to pick up with the Rehab Act Part 1. This is not my most confident area. I feel pretty good about all the different areas, but Heather's definitely the expert in here. So if you have any questions that I can't answer, we'll go ahead and collect them and get back to you on that. So the Rehab Act has different titles. So there's the Voc Rehab Services, which is Title I. And then there's a research and training, which is Title II, and that's where you see a lot of the NIDAR, or National Institute of Disability and Independent Living and Research, rehabilitation research. And then there's a Title III, which you will do professional development, special projects, and demonstrations. And then Title IV is National Council on Disability. What I've learned the most about the different rehab acts is they all have a different purpose, and so there may be different funding. I don't do a lot of voc rehab, so I don't work with Title I very much, but I'm an academic medical center, so we have NIDAR funding and some different research grants, and so I do get to kind of dabble with Title II. And then in Title III, we have a couple projects that we've applied to that are smaller amounts. And then National Council on Disability is broader. So from my perspective, I tend to work with more 2 and 3, and then sometimes with Title IV. 5 talks about patients' rights and advocacy. One area that I've really started tapping into is we're getting just an enormous amount of declined power wheelchairs, trying to get consumers involved and help them understand their rights. So if a consumer will file a appeal or a request for a fair hearing, or feel that their rights have not been honored, it's much more powerful than the clinical team continually fighting with the insurance company. So I've started using more of the Title V. Title VI is employment opportunities for individuals with disabilities. Sometimes you see this also with, I have like Title I, voc rehab, but employment opportunities works hand in hand with the Title I. And then Title VII is independent living centers that people can stay in as a transition or a little longer term until they can get their own act or own resources together. So that was the Part 1, Part 2, and then Part 3 goes into what I talked about, the rights and advocacy. So looking at their rights as far as employment for somebody with disability, what are your rights going into being able to at least have a fair chance at that employment with any accommodations that may be needed. The Section 502 is architectural transportation, looking at the compliance board, new buildings versus old buildings, restrooms within buildings, parking spaces. Sometimes what I've run into is the building may be covered by the Rehab Act because it's meeting the minimal guidelines, but because the facility serves people with disabilities, they may need more parking places or more family bathrooms. And so sometimes when we try to dive into Section 502, we find that we may need more than the minimal because of the type of facility that it is. So you can get caught a little bit, but it's good to know what at least the standards are. 503 is employment under federal contracts, and then non-discrimination under federal grants. 508 is electronic and information technology, looking at what is required and considered required for accessibility standards. And then 509 is protection and advocacy for individual rights. Title 6, so I'm just trying to keep track of these. Employment opportunities for individuals with disabilities breaks down into projects within the industry and then supportive employment. Other AT-related legislation is Fair Housing Act, hearing aid compatibility, television decoder, telecommunications. You guys can read these: the Air Carrier Access, Developmental Disabilities Assistance, and Older Americans Act. So whatever area that you're working in, if you start getting some barriers for compliance, if it's a funding for acquisition of equipment, if it's an accommodation for a ramp and access to a building, then these are where you can dive down and get some more specific standards. So both the ADA and Rehab Act require reasonable accommodation. So which act trumps which? Do you have to start with ADA and then appeal and go to the Rehab Act? I probably, without thinking through it, I probably always start with the ADA because I think that's easier to interpret. And then I probably jump into the different Rehab Acts. I haven't recently done a lot with like physical accommodation. That's where I tend to use a lot of those. But I've been diving into more the rights and advocacy for helping people understand how to advocate for themselves. Funding sources. So some of these funding sources are out. So Charles says, can't you choose which you want, whichever fits? Yeah, whichever fits the appeal. Absolutely. There's really no wrong answer. So funding, when I review this with my grad students, they're very I don't want to say green, but they don't have a frame of reference of the relationship between some of these. So it makes you really step back and look at some of these work together, and some of these work together, some of these compete with each other, and then some are not related at all. So for instance, the VA. So if you have VA funding, you pretty much have that bucket, and you are able to that's kind of like you usually start with your basic funding. So VA, Medicare, Medicaid. You can have a combination of Medicare, Medicaid. You can be on disability and have a form of like a combination of these. If you could have a private insurance and then a secondary. So these are all like the Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security, disability, private. I look at this under the medical model. So this is a lot of what I see in the hospital. The VA is also a medical model for the veteran. When I look at these top 4, I look at some different models. So Voc Rehab can be really creative, and you can have that in addition to any of these bottom half. You apply for Voc Rehab if you have a goal for work or for school reentry. Workers' comp is you're awarded a workers' compensation. And so if you have a certain claim for a disability, you may have workers' comp for that claim. But then if you have other health-related needs, you may still need to use this bottom bucket here. The education system with the IDEA Act, those are all really within the bubble of the school systems. So again, someone comes to the wheelchair seating clinic. If there's assistive technology that's needed for the child to be able to complete their learning, then the school may be the funding source to purchase it. If a child has mobility needs and they need help acquiring a wheelchair seating system, the school system may be able to help them get it and bill their Medicaid, or the child may be able to go to a clinic and work under the medical model and get the Medicaid. So are you seeing how there's kind of some intertwined? And then the children's rehab or medical services, usually for just that child, so it could consider the parents separately. So let me see what these questions are. So with accountable care organizations, why didn't all this go away? With exchanges, Medicare and Medicaid, plus schools, private and VA, everyone is covered. So who would need access to these acts? So you're talking about the Rehab Act and the ADA? I don't know who's asking this question. I don't know what 1111 is. I think for the purposes you just need to understand that there's certain acts that exist out there in Congress, and there's different definitions for them. They all work hand in hand. So the ADA, is going to work, is put out there, but that doesn't mean that you can't go into the different rehab acts. Let's see the second half of the question. Accountable care organizations, why didn't they go away? Exchanges, Medicare. I can tell you that my experience with the accountable care organizations is it's actually made it more complicated. So when somebody has a HMO of one of these Medicare, Medicaid, it's going to have different rules. The combination of all these insurances is going to have different rules based on whatever that organizational group is. The good part about this top is that these can be complementary resources that are in addition to what your medical model has. And again, for the purpose of the course and keeping it a more baseline, just understand that these are all options that are out there. A not Accountable Care Act, affordable, the Obama. Okay, I'm not sure I'm understanding what your question is. So if everybody has insurance, then why didn't all these go away? Well, just because you have insurance doesn't mean insurance is covering what you need. And there's an enormous amount of denials that are going on right now. So we need to have advocacy, and we need to have rules in place to continue to push the legislation to be able to continue to fund what is needed. So now I'm going to go into the VOC rehab. So for VOC rehab eligibility, you have to be disabled or require VOC rehab. Sorry, I'm trying to get these bars out. Services to prepare for, secure, retain, or regain employment. You have to have an evaluation of eligibility, and you have to have a written plan set forth for the employment goal and specific service to be provided. What individual written plan, and then now the individual plan for employment. So if I have a young individual with a spinal cord injury and they were starting college or they were interrupted with college, so preparing for employment would be considered college. If I have somebody that's in the workforce that can't return to their job, and then they may be looking for other jobs. So they get a referral, they meet with a counselor, and then the counselor sets a plan on how do you need VOC rehab's help in securing and pursuing a vocational goal. And then they help with the plan of guiding the individual. There's a assessment that can include a referral for the provision of the equipment, to assess developed capacities for the person to perform. And so you might want to do, like, sometimes they have work assessments, functional capacity evals. Sometimes they may have specialists to say, hey, does this person really need a standing frame? Do they need a standing wheelchair? How do you think they should be able to use this equipment? So looking at both rehab services, there's the assessment, there's counseling, there's training. Sometimes depending on if there's a job coach that is needed, that can also be working with the organization for training. They will look at diagnose and treat physical and mental impairments to reduce any impediments. And if you want to make sure that if financial support is not available from other sources. VOC Rehab can also fund either transportation or help with modifications of the vehicle. So I know that They will pay for hand controls. They will pay for installing a lift. They will not pay for a vehicle itself, but they will pay for installing the vehicle. Thanks, George. I appreciate you looking for that resource. Personal assistance. So again, making sure that if somebody needs something that is not covered, the voc rehab is always going to be the funding source of last resort. So if there is a funding that their primary insurance will pay for something, then they may not need to tap into the voc rehab. But voc rehab is there to support, to make sure that that person has the most success to get into school or college. School, college, or employment. And then again, any assistive technology that is needed. One thing that was interesting is that they used to pay for laptops, but now they consider laptops just a regular, everyday resource. And so they don't fund them like they used to, because they used to pay for either desktops or laptops so somebody can work remotely. But just like almost everybody has a phone, they feel that everybody has access to computers. If it's deemed that they don't have access, then they're a very open funding source that they would consider it. So now we're into assistive technology. So evaluating the needs, looking at purchasing, leasing, or otherwise providing for the acquisition of the devices. So voc rehab will, like I said, they will help fund it as long as there is a funding source of last resort. Coordinating and using other therapies, interventions, or services. So if you need a specialist within some of the training, that can be a consideration. Will they cover the cost for a seat elevator? Some patients need it to reach the heights of their desks. Yes, they would. So what they want is they just want to see a denial from the main insurance company, and then they would pick up the cost of that. The biggest thing is that you need to be upfront with a supplier, and a lot of times the suppliers get real hesitant because you have to order it on the chair. It's best to order it on the chair. Well, let's say you order it on the chair and then you go in and the funding never kicks in. Well, then you're stuck with that chair. It's a seat elevator. But I make sure that I plan upfront and get the consumer involved. A voc rehab is a really, really good resource. It's the waivers that are under the Medicaid that become a little trickier, that their timeline for following up, you can stretch. Like I've had people wait 4 or 5 months. Their chair was there and ready, but we didn't have waiver coverage, and that has really stretched out the need. Yeah, so sometimes the patient will cover, like they'll do an ABN. Ticket to work. So, disclosure, this is not one that I work with a lot, but let's go through together with the ticket to work and work incentive programs. So consumers that get Social Security and Social Security disability get a ticket, what they call ticket to purchase services from employment networks. It's an outcome-based network, outcome-based payment to the different networks, and the clients are still eligible for voc rehab. They have money for technical assistance, and there's a longer period of Medicare benefits after the cash payments cease due to the income and possible continued Medicaid eligibility. So sometimes there's uncertainty of the network funding the assisted technology, but it's a kind of that resource that is available in addition to some of the work incentives. And from what I understand, it is more like employment driven and to assure people can get into the workforce. Workers' comp. So workers' comp is a system of statutes enacted by each state that provides medical, lost time, permanent disability benefits for employees hurt in the scope of their employment. Employees give up the right to sue employers in exchange for assured benefits, and they don't have to prove negligence or freedom from contributory negligence in order to collect the benefits. States have guaranteed funds that take over when a carrier goes bankrupt. So if somebody has a claim, and the bigger claims are like a spinal cord injury, they have certain codes that are approved for the workers' comp benefits. the caution is that we have had people come in wanting power wheelchairs that may have claims that aren't related to their mobility. So then the workers' comp case managers may deny the claim, saying their approved diagnoses are XYZ, and these are not related to mobility, and so therefore we can't cover the request. The person may need it because maybe they have arthritis, maybe they have developed COPD, maybe they have a lot of comorbidities that prevent them from being a safe functional ambulator. But if those diagnoses aren't eligible for workers' comp, then we need to go through the person's insurance to acquire the equipment for that claim. I hope that makes sense. So just because you have workers' comp isn't a carte blanche for everything. It has to be related to the injury that the claim is for. IDEA. So we talked about this a little earlier. You must qualify for special ed services. The student must meet the definition of one of the enumerated disabilities. It's, free and appropriate public education, must be at no cost to the parents or the student. And it doesn't mean a district must provide the best education. That's a curious statement. But they have to provide an environment in which the student has the ability to learn. So if someone is having difficulty learning and participating in the classroom because they have a disability, then the IDEA Act says that they qualify for special ed services and also the use of technology. Those of you in the school systems may be able to explain this a lot better, but I know there's a lot of sensitivity to not over-recommend, or sometimes we get families that really are pushing a certain type of assistive technology, but that technology doesn't work for that individual. And then the team at the schools get very much put on the hot seat. The most recent situation that I had was there was a family that was pushing for an iPad and computer technology for the individual, but the individual had a lot of language issues that they wouldn't be able to use that equipment. So the conflict was the family was pushing technology, but it wasn't matching what the impairment of the individual was. So there are some times where we will have that person come to the Assistive Technology Center at the medical center to get like that outside opinion. And I get very cautious of those because I have to put my hat on of the idea and the education model. Does this person need this for the classroom? So the other trick is, so they are coming to the AT center for us to do an outside assessment. Well, does the school pay for that, or does the person's insurance pay for it? I believe under the medical model, if you have insurance, you're asking for an independent eval, then you should get that independent eval. But a lot of times the families will demand that the school system pays for that. So even a better reason to collaborate and stay in partnership and all work together so that we can support each other in these really tough situations. Kids are moving a lot. You cannot guarantee that one district is going to have the same stuff as the next. That's a really good point. And again, I'm not in the schools. So that's something I wouldn't have come up with. So it's tough. It's a kind of a whole world in itself with the school systems. And that is Heather's world too. So we can tap into her on Tuesday. We'll allow some time in the beginning. So if the district recommends the eval, they must pay. But if the parents seek an independent eval, they pay. Okay. That makes sense. I've had it go both ways. So again, continuing, assistive technology can assist students to remain in the least restrictive environment. The AT definition is similar to other federal laws, and it also includes services. The exception, the AT device does not include a medical device that's surgically implanted or replacement of such device like a cochlear implant. Home use if needed to ensure and include in the IEP that the school does own the equipment. Yes. Sometimes, if I'm looking at the question, sometimes if it goes due to a process, the district ends up paying anyways. Oh, to due process. Yeah, I think we could probably talk about this school systems for a while. Voc Rehab may purchase AT when they're transitioning. So The trick with voc rehab is you have to look at the eligibility. Sometimes they're not eligible until a certain age, and sometimes they're not eligible until after they graduate. And so I'm seeing more and more effort put into the transitions, which is great, because once they leave the school system network, some people don't have the ability to navigate on their own. So we're seeing a lot more resources pop up for the transition age. So the other part of the idea is that each state education agency must adopt the National Instructional Materials Access Standard to ensure blind and other persons with print disabilities receive instructional materials in a timely manner. We have something, you know how you guys were talking about the Tech Act earlier? So the Technology Act is that every state has a Technology Act. In the school systems, we have, it's called OCALI, and it's like a central resource for all the school districts to centralize some of the assistive technology needs in education. So I don't know if anyone knows anything in similar other states, but that can be kind of a clearinghouse where they can get a lot of materials in Braille. They have a lot of books in Braille and a lot of different resources that one school system may not have. So Medicaid, I am very familiar with Medicaid. So it was established in 1965, and it was the Title 19 of the Social Security Act. Largest single funding source for AT devices, if in most but all states. And the state Medicaid programs do have what I mentioned the word waiver earlier, home and community-based waivers. They're describing it as a vendor payment program. So if you think about it, it was established in 1965, and that's not that long ago. And so a lot of the equipment and technology that we have isn't really designed for what the system was set up for. Each state has been able to define it within their state, and some areas of the country have gone through a really terrible time getting things funded. In other areas of the state, it's been pretty consistent. So I'm in Ohio. I haven't had that difficult of a time. Michigan, which is north of me, went through a really horrible time for coverage. So it could be good, and it could be challenging. We're seeing a lot of things changing. Waiver, so once you are eligible for Medicaid, you sign up for waiver. There's a lot of different waivers, and there's waivers for equipment. There's waivers for home accessibility, and there's waivers for attendant care. So asking if that person has eligibility and helping them get to a social worker to get it set up is really important to be able to access more assistive technology. So there's a 3-part test for determining the right to Medicaid-funded DME. So you have to be eligible for Medicaid. The requested item must fit within the required services or categories, and the requested item must be medically necessary. Each state is going to have different requirements. Some will adopt the CMS policy, and some will have their own. In Ohio, Medicaid will consider community access a lot more than the Medicare. And so sometimes it's a little bit easier getting equipment when we see somebody has Medicaid, because they will consider community and they don't have that in-home restriction. But again, every state is different. So these are the other components that if you're eligible for Medicaid, that, you know, if you have supplemental Social Security recipient or state criteria, we always see medical necessity under everything. And then the Medicaid buy-in for working individuals. So if you are working, there's a specific, you can only work up to a certain point before you lose your Medicaid. There's a spend down program. So somebody can say you receive full Medicaid after you spend down $300 a month. So once somebody pays for catheters or any medical supplies or co-payments on medication, a lot of times they're going to hit that spend down. And so that allows people to work and still have Medicaid. And then there's home and community-based service waivers. So I mentioned the waivers already. So this continues on for criteria. And so mandatory service categories for AT DME funding. So yes, they do have specific criteria. They have, just trying to kind of think about, since I picked this up for Heather. So there's home health care services, and then there's early and periodic screening services. So when it comes to, I know in Ohio we have what's called BCMH, it's Bureau for Child Mental Handicap. So we have BCMH for kids. So if the parents don't qualify for Medicaid, but the child can, then there can be specific funding under. And so I think that has to do with this early and periodic screening. Optional categories. So these are the different areas where you can seek funding. Medicaid will pay for home health. They will pay if somebody's in a facility. They pay for clinical services, preventative, prosthetics, rehab, speech. When somebody is in a facility, each state will have different rules. And I keep giving you examples in Ohio. If a person is needing custom molded and custom seating, then that is a precursor for them being eligible for Medicaid buying a wheelchair for them at the facility. If they don't need custom molding, then the Medicaid will not fund equipment for somebody in a facility. So you really need to understand the rules and dive into what the different criteria state by state are. Other definitions for DME: can withstand repeated use, is primarily customary to serve a medical purpose, so they don't pay for recreation. Generally not useful in the absence of illness or disability, and it is appropriate for in the home. Medicaid Act provides funding for medical care, rehab, and other services, and so meets the cost of medical necessary. We're kind of repeating ourselves a little bit here. They can do appropriate limits on criteria, and they can choose to deny, like a seat elevator is a good example we brought up earlier. So this third bullet says a good letter of justification should support medical necessity, but also every state has their own paperwork. Illinois has a 12-page form. Texas has, I know it's a pretty long form. I've seen it. I can't think of the page number. I want to say it's 12 or 14 pages. Ohio just changed their Medicaid forms. So what I like about the Ohio form is that I can write my full letter of justification, and then in the Medicaid form, if there's not enough room in the boxes, I can say refer to my letter of justification. Before they redid that, that was not an option. It's just whatever you can fit in those boxes is all they would consider. So now we have Medicare. So Medicare is the federal government health care for someone 65 or older, or you have a disability. In order to be eligible for Medicare, is you have to have a disability 2 years or longer. So when somebody is injured and they have, let's say, private health insurance, they no longer can get to work, they get Medicaid, they have that disability for 2 years, it'll then trigger into Medicare. So a lot of times when people are coming back for their second pieces of equipment, they may have more restrictive funding than when they initially got it. If somebody has a progressive disease like ALS, you can get a fast track to become eligible for Medicare. Somebody can have only Part A and B, or A, B, and D. So we get a lot of people that maybe have only qualified for Medicare Part A, and that's not going to help with any of the DME. These are other eligibilities, 65 or older. And as I said, if you're under 65, if you've been disabled for at least 24 months or 2 years, it also has a qualification of the continuing dialysis. And then I mentioned the ALS. Medicare says must withstand repeated use, primary medical purpose, if it's not useful to a person without the illness or injury. And then you can go through here with the all the different familiar categories. Cap rental kind of pops up and then it goes away. Right now it's on hold. Everybody's expected to accept the funding that was identified with cap rental, but they're not excluding the specific providers. So for those of you that don't do seating, Medicare had a program where they chose certain suppliers that can only vend basic DME and basic wheelchairs. Right now, everybody can. And that was that competitive bid. So as of today, it's on hold, and they're relooking at it, but the rates are still the rates that they had before. And there is a fee schedule. Developmental disabilities. So if eligibility for services determined by the designated agency in the state, there's different state plans, there's individual programs. You have to have been diagnosed prior to the age of 22. So where this has come up is that we have some individuals with Huntington's disease, and there's a juvenile Huntington's disease, and then there's an adult onset. If we can prove that diagnosis was made before they hit 22, then they're eligible for DD services. DD services is also another really good service. It's out of the box thinking, and it can be above and beyond what your traditional insurance is. They expect it to be, continue indefinitely. So it's not a short term, it's a long-term disability. And they expect you to have that disability continued into the future. Private sources, I think this is changing. I think people are getting tired of fighting, and as technology is getting more accessible, people are willing to just go out and buy it. Personal resources and personal funds, people are starting to use. You're seeing crowdfunding, so people are doing fundraising to get some modifications for their home. There are loan programs. Every tech act in the state has a loan program, and now I'm totally blanking. There's a low interest loan program that you're seeing almost everywhere. It'll come to me what it is, but we're really encouraging people to investigate some of these alternate funding for things that are just not considered medically necessary but feasible. So I did talk about the tech loans. The service clubs are getting harder, so you can, if someone we see this more with newer injuries, that the smaller towns or different organizations will have somebody raise money for a certain individual to do, like, usually it's a specific defined project. So building a ramp or providing an item like for the wheels, like a bathroom. It can also be something with transportation. And then yes, I'm looking at does it include donor's choice? I don't know what donor's choice, but like GoFundMe is a crowdsourcing that I'm thinking about. And then volunteer organizations, you usually see these through churches. Some organizations like Home Depot and Lowe's will be willing to donate the lumber, but they just need someone to put it together. And so, donors choose funds, things for a classroom. Okay, that's another, I wasn't familiar with that. So now the written justifications are what the clinician and the medical team can do. So our job is to show that there's a demonstration of need, provide all the supporting documentation. We need to be aware of the criteria and the insurance's rules, using our terminology. We really don't, I only use video if I go to a fair hearing, but we're using a lot of pictures, and we need to be able to paint the story. The thing that I tell a lot of the therapists is if the patient's insurance says that we consider seat elevators not medically necessary, then there's nothing that you can say or justify or appeal or fight, because their criteria is that we're not going to cover it. So I can't argue with bad criteria. Now, if they're denying something that they're not saying is within the confines of their criteria, then that's when you have that ability to open it. But we're seeing more and more insurance companies being extremely restrictive, so we need to help the consumer educate themselves and become an advocate. So earlier I talked about service delivery systems. Let me check on the time. So we have AT suppliers and equipment distributors. We have local affiliates of a national nonprofit. So I think of those as like an ALS association, loan closet, lots, private practice or therapists in private practice, rehab, inpatient, outpatient. So that's under the medical model. The school setting that we've talked about, state agencies like the Voc Rehab, university. So there can be like university based where there might be student run clinics that somebody can go to. We talked about VA, we talked about volunteers. We have been talking about just the team and making sure that we're all keeping in mind what the needs of the consumer are. When you have a lot of people that are supporting the individual, we need to make sure that we're all talking. And my best example is my school therapists are my partners. So I need to be reaching out to them because they know what that everyday need is. And then I'm hoping that I can take some of the burden of the paperwork and some of the financial approval away from them. But at the end of the day, we have to be talking and making sure that we're both saying the same message to the consumer, and the consumer is also not splitting us and working us against each other. So the role of the rehab team is the referral and intake, identifying the needs. We evaluate. The design, mod, and customization can get a little tricky because it can be with both. And the implementation can be with both. But the training and use and application can be with both, and follow-up and outcomes. So Olga, I'm put you on the spot. You had some really good questions in your email, kind of like defining who is responsible for what. If you look at the wheelchair service delivery model, it does go through and really define, if you think of the equipment, so the supplier is responsible for the equipment. The clinician is responsible for doing the assessment. So if I do an assessment and I take really bad measurements and I tell the vendor to order an 18 by 20 wheelchair, and that wheelchair comes in, the person that has the liability is not me that took the bad measurements. It's the vendor that and let's say the person doesn't fit, the vendor has to return that chair to stock. So anything related to the equipment, the warranty, the repair, all of that is the vendor's scope. The clinical recommendations and the interpretation of the need is the clinicians. And so we think of just the separation of duty. So I shouldn't be recommending something that I'm making a profit on. But when you go through this, role of the RET, rehab technologist, or on the rehab team, it could be, kind of going through, starting off very independently and then really working collaboratively with the team. The training, I think of that as collaborative because as a clinician, I know their cognitive, their language, their knowledge, and I'm able to look at them clinically. But if the equipment never works, then it's a liability of the supplier. So that's where it needs to be a partnership. Consumer Bill of Rights. So the right for information about the available devices. They have a right to advocate for the need for AT, right to honest answers, right to independent using technology, right to due process. They have a right to disagree, and they have right to opinions. My latest soapbox is patients have rights, but patients also have responsibilities. So when somebody comes into the medical center, they sign rights and responsibilities. And so, yes, you have all these rights, but you also have the responsibility to be a partner in your care and treat people respectively. So I'm just adding that to this slide here. Quality assurance. This is a big word lately. So the quality assurance is making sure that we're monitoring what is being implemented and the safety and the carry through of the equipment. Almost every company is going to have their QA standards, and they're going to be looking at their services as well as their devices, and then they're going to be assessed by a third party for that certification and accreditation. So hospitals, their quality assurance is Joint Commission. Vendors, I think you have like HME or AC. I can't even think of I know there's some vendors on the line. So shout out or type in, George, are you a supplier? Some of the accreditations that you guys have. But Joint Commission is a quality assurance. We talked about outcomes a few classes ago, the importance of being able to have good program eval. So essentially, did you do what you say you wanted to do? And can you provide that for the consumer's, best practice and outcome? This goes into the evaluation. So looking at a good assistive technology eval, making sure you're looking at the performance, the ergonomics, the reliability, the safety, and asking practical questions. One of my practical questions is it solving the problem that you intended to solve? So sometimes technology solves one problem but creates two more problems. And so going back to, remember that whole assessment, that red diagram that I had? And so this is going more into within the evaluation, you need to look at these specific questions. Principles of design and product development. So looking at the design process, the testing, the universal design, not only does it help with someone with a disability, but it makes it easier for everybody. And I'm just going to leave it there. So the design process, these are the steps when we're launching a new product. So we're looking at what is the need, defining the problem, you're doing the research. We do a lot with our engineers and making sure that you're analyzing the criteria. Are there other solutions to it? And analyzing all your solutions and then decide how are you going to move forward. So the biggest part of this is if you don't truly define what problem you're trying to solve, you can get stuck in this phase here. So once you're able to really go through this synthesis, then you can really start presenting a product so you'll be able to communicate and sell it. Testing is a big deal. So there are a lot of standards for testing, and Resna has an entire section on standards and ANSI standards and that whole component. But essentially, you just need to know that product testing occurs with individual components, the prototype, clinical trials, beta testing, and then product line development. Under performance, these are the areas that are considered for safety, controllability, the robustness of it. Under the durability, they're looking at fatigue testing and testing during continuous operation to identify weakness. So if you have any interest in understanding more some of the product testing, it's a pretty intriguing area, and you can dive into some of that under the different ANSI Resna standards. Universal design we talked about. It's going to be usable by everybody to the greatest extent possible without any specialized adaptation. Principles of universal design are equitable use, flexibility in use, simple and intuitive, perception of information, tolerance to error, low physical effort, and size and space. So it is really the benefit of first time I went out with my daughter in a stroller, a universal design was really important because being able to just open the door while I was navigating a stroller was easier with the power door opener, just as it is someone that's in a power wheelchair. Liability, there is professional liability and then there's product liability. So you need to be aware of if somebody is covered under a group policy or if you're self-employed, if you have to get your own liability policies. For product liability, if you start making modifications to equipment, are you voiding the warranty? Looking at is a legal theory that was there negligence, was there breach of warranty, was there a liability that was infringed upon? Oh, good. Okay, so we made it through. We have 5 minutes. I'm going to go ahead and launch the test. And then if you have any questions to the side, feel free to do that. I have to find it first. Service delivery. Okay, so the test should be launching. Thanks for your support. Poor Heather. She was hoping that a tree didn't go down. She said there's a lot of trees in her backyard and we're having a lot of high winds here. So can everybody see it? Because I don't have anybody that has submitted the test. You can see it. Thanks. Thank you, Beth. I think it's been a long week. Does anyone else feel that way? First, I'm going to read the question. For tests, are we expected to know each act or program, legislative, dates, names, definition of each title, or will this be covered more globally? I will tell you that there's two parts to this. They've really made it not U.S. centric. And so they were supposed to throw out in the exam all the specific Medicare, Medicaid questions. When I took the exam, which was a while ago, I felt like I had to have like cards for understanding, oh, this is an IDEA Act. This is, the different acts. But I was told it's made much more global and they don't have it as specific. If you want to email Charlie, because they won't let it, I've not seen the new exam. I was a little bit relieved because I felt like when I took it, it had more heavy. That was one area I wasn't prepared for. Okay, let's see how we're doing. Okay, I have 73% submitted. I'm going to go ahead and close it, and then we can review it, and I'll share the results. Okay, so for Resna's Code of Ethics, which scenario would not represent an ethical dilemma? Purchasing AAC devices following an assessment by a qualified speech language pathologist. So that is not an ethical dilemma because the person was qualified and completed that assessment. So the wrong answers are recommending devices that may restrict freedom or privacy, selecting devices based on price, and recommending only devices manufactured by the ATP's employer. So that is a conflict of interest. 2, which legislation authorizes statewide programs to provide technology-related assistance to children and adults with disabilities, but prohibits payment funds directly to vendors who provide them? So that is the TECT Act. And so this is the example. I don't know who just asked. I closed my. So I think that's a question that we probably should loop back to Charlie because that is a very specific one. I mean, it doesn't hurt to understand them, but that would be something that you would want to really dedicate time with, is understanding differences. The value of understanding the differences is knowing what to refer people to. Just like I said, evoke rehab versus, the DD Act. And so knowing that if a child is eligible for DD services, that might open up their funding opportunity. Which legislation is not an entitlement program? So the ADA. So Ticket to Work, Individuals with Disability, and Medicare is an entitlement program. So that's where we probably did the least well as a group. And I think that's probably where Heather faded off and I jumped in. So think about some questions that you have, and we'll start Tuesday with questions for Heather. So we can kind of to get back and kind of up and track with the experts that we have for you. There's a question. Does anyone know of a resource of someone that has done a crosswalk of proprietary speech generating device software to ISO Apple? I'm going to leave that to the group. If you are ready to head out for the night, we are done. I will stay on here for any questions and dialogue, and then we'll pick back up on Tuesday, and we'll spend the whole 2 hours doing seating and mobility. Thanks, Michael. Yes, happy Halloween to everybody. So, Olga, let me see what your question is. Does the funding process begin at 0 time during the referral and intake, or does it start during the assessment at week 1? Funding for the clinical services? And feel free to unmute yourself if you want. In general, I would say yes. But if something changes during, so let's say that there's 0 time, I get the referral, I have an intake, I start doing my assessments, I'm doing a trial, and let's say that person falls or the person acquires a pressure sore, then that's going to give me more information and I can change my recommendation. The clinical services are always covered as long as there's a necessity for that patient to be seen by the therapist. But the funding is once we've all agreed upon this is what we're going for, we turn it in. If after we've turned in the request for the equipment, there's a change in condition, then we can go back and send additional information to justify our need. But, so it's the funding does start from 0, but then there's a place where we have to end it, make our ask, wait and see what they say, and then we can continue to do additional requests. And Olga, I'll reply to your email tomorrow. I didn't get a chance today. I'll answer all those questions for you. I'm going to stay on one more minute, then I'm going to go ahead and shut down. It doesn't look like anyone has any more questions. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and sign off. Thanks, everybody.